All right, and to finish off the show, I'm going to finally, at long last, reveal my top 10 films of the 2010s. This is a segment that I've been wanting to do for a little while, but between other stories coming up, and again, just me being sick last week, I haven't gotten a chance to do it. So, what the 2010s have been a very influential decade in film for me. This is the decade where I feel like I've become more a more mature moviegoer, and this is the decade where, of course, I've turned into more of an actual filmmaker. So I think it was this during this sort of transitional time period in my life or all this is really during a pretty transitional time in my life where I feel like there are so many films from this decade that have influenced me so greatly, that have changed the way I look at movies and look at what movies can do and what they're capable of. So, and this is apparent in just how many just honorable mentions that I'm going to be giving. Now, there are certain films that, even though they aren't on my list, that I think that they're going to be remembered for in the decade. And so, like, some of those films that come to mind are, of course, Get Out, Mad Max Fury Road. I think just for the whole Best Picture debacle a couple years ago, Moonlight and La La Land have kind of, marched their way into legendhood. So, without further ado, I'm just going to start off with my honorable mentions, and they are The Lighthouse, They Shall Not Grow Old, Parasite, Roma, La La Land, Marriage Story, Joker, American Hustle, Django Unchained, Dunkirk, and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Alright, and to start off the actual top 10 list, coming to us all the way from 2012, is Silver Linings Playbook. The film follows Pat Solitano Jr., a man with bipolar depression, as he struggles to rebuild his life after an 8-month stint in a mental institution. Things get even more complex after meeting a girl with personal issues of her own. The film is directed and written for the screen by David O. Russell and is based on the novel of the same name by Matthew Quick, and stars and is completely stacked cast Bradley Cooper, Jennifer Lawrence, Robert De Niro, Chris Tucker, and Jackie Weaver. Now, the films from David O. Russell that I've seen are, of course, Silver Linings Playbook and American Hustle. I've also seen The Fighter and Flirting with Disaster. American Hustle was I believe the first R-rated film that I got to see in the theater, and Flirting with Disaster I had to watch for my narrator screenwriting class. Wasn't as crazy about that one. So based on those 4 films, this is definitely his best film. And one of the things that I really love about the film is that it deals with very, very heavy subjects, depression, bipolar disorder, and it does it while managing to be really, really funny at the same time, but it pays a lot of respect to the issues that it deals with. And this particular subject hits very close to home for David O. Russell, because, if I'm not mistaken, his son has bipolar disorder, and it's obvious that that sensitivity that comes with experiencing something like that, he brings that all to this film. It's a very, very funny film, and it's, like I said, very, very sensitive to its topics. There's so many moving parts to this particular story, and it handles them all very, very well. Now, I also had to read the book, I believe, in my senior year of high school. And while the book was really good, I honestly felt like the movie was better. A lot of times when it comes to books being adapted into movies, you feel like, and if you're really loyal to the book, you feel like something is missing from the transition from book to film. But honestly, I saw the movie first and then read the book. And based on that, I felt like there was something missing in the book as opposed to the movie. I just felt like the movie had it just had more weight to it, and I think that particularly goes with Robert De Niro's character, Pat Solitano Sr. I just felt like he had more layers to him, and that was put on more display. But this is one of those films that, of course, even though at its core is a romantic comedy, you can kind of see when the film ends, you can look back and just be like, okay, I probably could have seen that coming. But the way this film ends off didn't bother me at all because of what it goes through, what it puts you through just to get to that final destination. Like all the, troubles and turbulence that occurs between Bradley Cooper's character and Jennifer Lawrence's character, and of course between Bradley Cooper's character and the rest of his family. There's just so much going on. It's such a roller coaster from start to finish. And then, of course, to anchor the film, you have what I think are career best performances from Bradley Cooper and Jennifer Lawrence. Jennifer Lawrence won the Academy Award that year, and Bradley Cooper was nominated, but he lost to Daniel Day-Lewis in Lincoln. I think Cooper should have taken it. I think when it comes to winning awards, not necessarily acting and taking on certain roles, but when it comes to winning awards, going for historical figures is definitely the low-hanging fruit. I think Bradley Cooper had a much more substantial performance. And then, of course, on top of Cooper and Lawrence, this is Robert De Niro is probably my favorite performance. He gave my favorite performance in the entire film as the, rough around the edges, but at the same time, very, very emotional and, OCD father of, Pat Salvatore Jr. This is the best performance from Robert De Niro since, honestly, probably Casino. So this is a very, very good film. I love Silver Linings Playbook so much. It was one of those, it has, the rewatch value on this film is insanely high, which is pretty astonishing considering, like I said, the topics that it deals with. Okay, so coming in at number 9 from 2016 is Arrival. Arrival follows a linguist as she cooperates with the military to investigate an extraterrestrial visit with unknown intentions. The film is directed by Denis Villeneuve and is adapted for the screen by Eric Heiserer from the short story, Story of Your Life, by Ted Chiang. The film stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker. Now, one of the things that stands out to me the most about this film is how much it's rooted in realism. Of course, there's no proof of, there's no concrete proof of extraterrestrial life out there, that they have any plans on coming to Earth, but there's a very down-to-earth yet cinematic aesthetic that comes with this film. It shows what kind of effects that something like this could possibly have on, global conflicts and how, everyone else all over the world would react to something like this. And there's a very everyman-like quality of its characters. The visuals in this film are absolutely stunning, from the visual effects to the cinematography. The other thing that stands out to me the most in this film is how just cerebral it is. It's not a bunch of laser beams and explosions like you might expect from other sci-fi films. This is sci-fi for the deep thinker, and it's a very slow and steady film. Even though it's slow and steady, it doesn't drag. But this is definitely for a more patient moviegoer. If you're expecting something like, a Star Wars, when you hear the sci-fi genre, this won't meet your expectations. But either way, this is very cerebral. This is very meditative throughout most of this film, but at the same time, it ends up being very, very emotional, and that's not something I saw coming. There's a bit of an emotional part in the introduction of the film, but, I didn't think that it would end up playing as big of a part as it did. And that surprise turns out to be one of the best endings that I've ever seen in a film. I'm not ashamed to say that I cried my eyes out at the end of this movie. I'll never forget, I'm sitting in the theater, and the ending, of course, is running its course, and I'm coming to terms with so much of what the film is saying, and the music that they use. And I remember looking at my friend Roberto, and I'm like, Roberto, am I crying? I was shocked that something like this was actually making me cry, but it was, and I'm not ashamed to say it at all. This is a film that made me interested in Denis Villeneuve as a director. I've seen from him Sicario and Blade Runner, both of which are great movies. But I think this is his masterpiece. All right, now at number 8, coming to us from 2018 is Hereditary. Hereditary follows a series of sinister supernatural events as they plague a family after the death of their suspicious matriarch. The film stars Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, Gabriel Byrne, and Mila Shapiro, and is directed and written by Ari Aster. Now, this is one of those films where I'm never going to forget where I was when I saw it. I remember the theater that I saw it in, the relative position of my seat. I remember getting a seat towards the back in case for whatever reason I just wanted to run out because of all the scary things I heard about this movie, but I ended up making it through the entire film. Now, this is one of those horror films that have so much going on other than just the scares. There's so much more to this film. There's so much more to the story. When the film isn't being just, brutal or even sick in the imagery it puts on the screen, there's a lot of searing family drama to complement it, to go with it. Now, this isn't one of those films where something scary is popping out every second or every minute or even every scene. This is a much slower yet more suspenseful film, so you feel like something's going to happen throughout the entire duration of the film, even when it doesn't. But you're always on edge because, your senses are just tingling. Okay, something bad's going to happen. I don't know if it's now, I don't know if it's soon, I don't know if it's going to be later, but you just feel like you're on edge the entire time. And so that helps give the film like a very, very chilling atmosphere. And then, of course, when something horrific does pop out at you, then it's not something that you're going to forget for a very long time. There are certain images from the film that are still ingrained in my brain. There's one in particular that happens to a certain character, I want to say early to the middle portion of the film, that I remember seeing that and I'm like, oh my god, they went there. And I still, to this day, can't believe it. But on top of that, of course, performances across the board are absolutely amazing. Toni Collette, wow, what an incredible performance. That is honestly not only one of the best performances I saw that year, it's one of the best performances I've seen this decade. And I still can't believe that the movie across the board got snubbed at the Oscars, but her especially. What the hell was the Academy thinking that year? They did a terrible job picking the nominees that year. This is a fine example as to how there are a lot of times where they just don't know what the hell they're doing when it comes to voting in not films to be nominated. But Toni Collette is incredible. Alex Wolff gave the other standout performance in the film. It's very well crafted overall. The musical score is excellent, and all of this culminates into one of the most unforgettable climaxes and finales that I've ever seen. Like, this part of the ending of the film is pure insanity. And I'm like, wow, I wouldn't have been able to call that at all. Like, it was very, very well done. I loved Hereditary so much. This is the film of 2018. This and Roma were the films of 2018 that I could not shut up about. Now, docking in at number 7 is Her from 2013. Her follows a lonely writer in the near future as he enters an emotional romantic relationship with his personal operating system. Directed and written by Spike Jonze and stars Joaquin Phoenix, Rooney Mara, Amy Adams, and Scarlett Johansson as the writer's operating system, which goes by the name of Samantha. Now, this film is it was a huge risk. This film is definitely not something that would appeal to everybody, at least at face value. It's definitely a very strange concept, basically a man dating his computer. But once you get past the central premise, there's honestly a beautiful love story here. It's a very imaginative and original film. Despite the riskiness in its story, it doesn't play it safe throughout the course of its story. Once it gets into the story and it gets moving, it goes all in. And it's from that, of course, when you basically go as much as you can into a story like this one, it had a very soulful effect. I remember I watched this film right after my heart got broken by someone that I really cared about. And I'm not gonna lie, watching this, kind of fucked me up really good, if I'm being brutally honest with you. But it did it in the best way possible. Watching this film almost felt cathartic to me. So I definitely watched this at the right time. And the film, of course, takes place in the near future and has a dazzling vision of what the near future could possibly look like. There's a very glossy, but at the same time, realistic feel to it. And where I'm like, you know what? I kind of feel like this is how the future could possibly look. And, of course, the cinematography and production design, play a huge part in bringing that effect. And then, of course, on top of all that, this film wouldn't be anywhere without the performances from Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson. This is probably among the best performances I've ever seen from Joaquin Phoenix. I think this is the film that got me interested into him as an actor. And just the kind of talent, as strange of a duck as he is, the kind of talent that guy has when it comes to committing himself to a role and bringing everything he's got to the screen. So both him and I think Scarlett Johansson were absolutely robbed of Oscar nominations that year. So as strange as this film was a huge risk, but I think it was pulled off so well. Alright, now, coming in at number 6, all the way from 2010, is Inception. Now, there's no way you haven't heard of this one. So, Inception follows a robber on the run who uses dream-sharing technology to steal valuable corporate ideas, is given the task of planting an idea. Instead of stealing, planting an idea into the mind of a CEO. The film was directed and written by Christopher Nolan, and the film stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Marion Cotillard, Tom Hardy, Ellen Page, and Ken Watanabe. Now, of course, this film is obviously very, very original, and it's very ambitious and very complex. One of the things that stands out to me the most about this film is not only all the high-level concepts that are being thrown at you, but at the same time, this intelligence is perfectly balanced with the emotion that comes with this film. Now, in terms of intelligence versus emotion, I think intelligence has a slight edge over emotion, but when the two of them come together in this film, it's balanced out very, very well. There's an array of stellar characters. I remember when talks for a sequel were happening in terms of this film, there was one of those things where I wouldn't have minded. There was a time where I wouldn't have minded a sequel with these characters. I thought that would have been an interesting route to go down, just see what else you could do with these people. But you know what? It doesn't look like that's happening, at least for the time being. And I think now, a decade later, it's too late for that. So this film is fine as a standalone. This is a film that, at least to me, showed Christopher Nolan as a master filmmaker. The narrative in this film, which of course he wrote, doesn't take the easy way out with all of the complex ideas that it tools with. And now Christopher Nolan, of course, did The Dark Knight, and this was, I think in his career, that was a film that showed him as just like, a masterful filmmaker, but Inception is the one that showed him to be an auteur. That showed the kind of particular vision that Christopher Nolan has. And I think Inception is the one that brought him as a name into the filmmakers, into mainstream filmmaking. So, and on top of all that, technical production is absolutely flawless. This is another one that feels very lifelike despite its fantastical concepts. The musical score is one of the best I've ever heard. I love Hans Zimmer's score. Hans Zimmer is an absolute genius. This is one of the films that I could definitely see being very easily associated with the 2010s. All right, now coming in at number 5 from this past year is, of course, The Irishman. This is my number 1 film of 2019. It follows the life and mob career of mob hitman and union teamster Frank Sheeran, who reveals his alleged involvement in the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. Directed by Martin Scorsese. Cast of legends De Niro, Pesci, and Pacino. Script from Steven Zalian, based on the book I Heard You Paint Houses by Charles Brandt. Now, without going too much into it, because again, I have talked about this film before, this is one of Martin Scorsese's masterpieces of the 2010s. This just further highlights the kind of filmmaker that he is, the kind of energy that he has as a filmmaker in his upper 70s now. When I look at something like this, the massive undertaking that this film was, again, 3.5 hours long, so many moving pieces to the story, the production. I'm astonished that someone of course, his age was able to pull off something like this. And I'm sure doing something like this just knocks the hell out of you, and he just does it so well. This film shows that he doesn't have any signs of slowing down. This shows the kind of filmmaker that he is, and then I think this builds on his other films. Whereas films like Goodfellas, which I think you could compare this one to, doesn't have nearly as much of an emotional route as, say, The Irishman does. So The Irishman builds on films like Goodfellas by having a more profound and poignant ending, and so this shows that you can indeed teach an old dog new tricks. All right, coming in at number 4 from 2017 is 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. Now, this is my number 1 film of 2017. Months after the brutal death of her daughter, a grieving mother challenges and harasses the local police department with billboards calling them out and asking why the crime hasn't been solved yet. The film is directed and written by Martin McDonagh and stars Frances McDormand, Woody Harrelson, and Sam Rockwell. Now, this film is just as darkly hilarious as it is searing in its drama and emotion. This is I remember just laughing my ass off throughout a big chunk of this film to the point where I almost pissed myself. And then almost in what appeared to be like, the next scene over, the film felt like it was just taking a jackhammer to all of my feels. And especially because there's this one voiceover monologue in particular after the demise of a certain character. I don't want to give it away, but I remember it hitting me much harder than I thought it was going to. Now, of course, the film has a very heavy central premise, but for whatever reason, with its darkly comedic tone, I didn't think that there would be as many emotional moments as there were. And I remember with this particular monologue, I didn't quite cry, but I remember my eyes getting at least a bit watery. So that was something that I didn't see coming. Now, Martin McDonagh, of course, pulls no punches with anything that he does in this movie, from the way that he makes the characters talk to the things that he makes the characters do. This film is politically incorrect in the best way possible, and it feels like just a middle finger to everything, to everybody and everything. It's a very angry film, but at the same time, it doesn't feel bitter, if that makes sense. And that's fine. That's totally fine. Every single person in this film, to an extent, you can kind of see why they do the things they do, to an extent. And then, of course, you have a terrific ensemble, led mainly by, of course, Frances McDormand, Sam Rockwell, and Woody Harrelson. All of them give some of the career best performances, in my opinion. This is the best stuff I've ever seen from them. And the characters that the cast is given are all very layered. They all feel like they have a point to being in the story. They all feel developed. None of them feel shallow at all. And, of course, to top it all off, the film ends up being kind of open-ended, which works, in my opinion, because you don't always get the salvation that you want after something terrible happens to you in your life. And you know what? It's definitely not the easy way out, which I admire very much about the film. Now, I've seen 3 films from Martin McDonagh. I've seen, of course, this one, In Bruges, and Seven Psychopaths. 3 Billboards is by far his best film. I haven't heard about him doing any other films, but I have no idea how he's going to top this one coming up. Alright, so now my number 3 pick is Birdman, coming to us from 2014. This is my favorite film of 2014. I was very happy when it won Best Picture over Boyhood at the Oscars, and I remember thinking to myself, finally, the Academy picked the best movie of the year to win Best Picture. So the film follows a former comic book actor as he tries to prove his worth as an artist by mounting a successful Broadway production. The film stars Michael Keaton, Emma Stone, Edward Norton, Amy Ryan, Naomi Watts, and Zach Galifianakis, and is directed by Alejandro González Iñárritu. I hope I'm saying his name right. Now, the ambition of this film is absolutely insane, and it's ambitious and just high-reaching in both its technical production and storytelling. There's an underlying conflict between art house and mainstream entertainment, and that's a conflict that I very much appreciate being portrayed in a film. And I think that, of course, that's especially prevalent with, all these indie filmmakers trying to make a name for themselves in a film market that's so saturated with, 10 Fast and Furious films and 20-plus Marvel Cinematic Universe films. So I love that this film was able to portray something like that. The characterization is just flat out gripping. Not only are all the main characters integral to the story, but everyone is not only well developed, but very interesting as well. The film has a pitch black sense of humor. It can be very, very bizarre, but at the same time very brazen in its sense of humor. And of course, it was very thought-provoking, especially the ending. I remember the ending of the film being debated long after I first saw it in the theater. And then, of course, on top of all this, probably one of the things that it's known for the most is the one-shot illusion. This is the first film that I can at least remember trying to pull off this sort of thing. I think, and again, this didn't feel gimmicky, at least with this film, because, at least to me, because the film, of course, centers on someone trying to mount a play, and then, of course, a play, for the most part, is a non-stop show. And this one-shot illusion made this film feel like a non-stop show. And what I thought was just absolutely crazy is that you have, all these long shots mixed with these, long and rapid-fire dialogues with, all these complex and extended motions and actions from everybody on the screen, which I thought was just absolutely jaw-dropping. The cast is absolutely incredible. And then, of course, the standout performances come from Michael Keaton and Edward Norton. Michael Keaton, I think, should have won the Oscar for Best Actor that particular year, like what I was saying with Bradley Cooper versus Daniel Day-Lewis. When it comes to playing real-life characters, I feel like that's the easy way out in terms of, winning awards. And then Michael Keaton lost to Eddie Redmayne in The Theory of Everything, who played Stephen Hawking. But Michael Keaton should have absolutely won that year. And from the 3 films that I've seen from Iñárritu, this one, The Revenant, and Babel, this is definitely his best film. So I want to see if there's ever a point that he can actually top Birdman. All right, coming in at number 2 is The Wolf of Wall Street. This is one of my favorite films from 2013. This follows the rise and fall of Jordan Belfort as we follow him through his involvement in corruption, greed, and excess as a Wall Street stockbroker in the 80s and 90s. The film is directed by Martin Scorsese and stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Jonah Hill, and Margot Robbie. The film is written for the screen by Terrence Winter and is adapted from the book by Jordan Belfort. Now, I remember saying before, whether it's in this episode or another episode, that Martin Scorsese managed to make two masterpieces this decade. First, the other one was The Irishman. This was his first one. This is an epic dark comedy, and I don't feel like I've ever seen any other movies this funny with this kind of scale. This film has a 3-hour runtime, and it just never drags. It's hilarious from start to finish, and of course, it's all about access, of course, from the runtime to just like the language that it uses, and it never once, as the film, feels self-indulgent in any way, which I think is very interesting. The film, of course, is as bold as it is explicit. In terms of all the things that could win a film a more mature rating, of course, violence, language, sex, and all that, you name it, it's got it. And I'm still kind of stunned that a movie this explicit was made by someone who at the time was still in his 70s. Of course, and there are so many just iconic scenes and lines throughout this entire film. You could cherry pick them all throughout. Of course, the cast is led by Leonardo DiCaprio and Jonah Hill, and not only do they give fantastic performances, some of the best I've ever seen from them, but they work as a great duo together. Okay, finally, my number one film of the 2010s comes all the way from the beginning of the decade, and that has to be The Social Network. The Social Network is the dramatization of the founding of Facebook that follows the trials and legal issues of its founders Mark Zuckerberg and Eduardo Saverin. The film was directed by David Fincher and is written for the screen by Aaron Sorkin, based on the book The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrich. The film stars Jesse Eisenberg as Mark Zuckerberg, Andrew Garfield as Eduardo Saverin, Justin Timberlake as Sean Parker, and Armie Hammer in a double performance playing both Winklevoss twins, Tyler and Cameron. Now, I've seen a few films from David Fincher. We've seen Zodiac, Curious Case of Benjamin Button, Fight Club, and Gone Girl as well. Now, this by far is his best film in my opinion. This film, from what I remember from the other films, seems to be very different in a lot of ways, but I still think that this is the film that he still has yet to beat. The film, I want to say, is about 2 hours long, and it feels very swift and slick without feeling rushed. The editing has a lot to do with this. There's just so much going back and forth and just and just carrying you along throughout the film, and it never feels rushed once. And the film has a lot going on in terms of its heady concepts and just the pace that it moves at, and it never feels messy and all over the place. There are a lot of moving parts to the story, and it manages to just feel like it's all sewn in together the right way. The leading performances from Jesse Eisenberg and Andrew Garfield are absolutely terrific. Garfield in particular, I think, again, was robbed of an Oscar nomination. Script, like I said before, was written by Aaron Sorkin, and in my opinion, he's the best screenwriter working today. The man is a genius with the page. And this particular screenplay is one of my all-time favorite screenplays, period, out of any movie I've ever seen. This is probably my favorite adapted screenplay. I'm stunned with how intelligent this film is, and I first saw it when I want to say I was about 13, 14 years old, and I while I was still interested in it, I didn't get it as much because there are a lot of heady concepts that it plays with, and just the way that everyone talks in this film. So very, very high class, very erudite, and just highly intellectual. And it took me years to fully grasp what everyone was saying and the weight of what everyone was saying. But now that I do, I can't help but feel I can't help but feel smarter. It was the weirdest feeling the more and more I picked up on when watching this film. I remember always hearing that if you want your younger kids to be smart, make them watch Baby Mozart. If you want your mid-teens to older teenagers to get smarter, make them watch this movie. That's just how high concepts this film actually is. On top of that, of course, the music is absolutely wonderful. There's a very techno aspect to the score, which I didn't think would play well with Academy voters, but it ended up winning Best Original Score over Inception. Don't know how that happened, but if Inception had to lose to any other musical score, this would be the one that it would lose to, and it makes sense. The cinematography and just the aesthetic of this film is kind of luminously dark, and I feel like that's influenced me as a filmmaker more than I would have thought, because even though I've only made a couple short films, I remember in at least the next short film that I plan on doing, someone asked me, okay, what's the look that you want for this film? and I remember the answer that I was giving them was like, kind of luminously dark, and using The Social Network as an example. Now, the thing that stands out the most about this film and the impact and legacy that I think this film is going to have is that when it comes to not only just the 2010s in film, but just the 2010s, this is the film that I think of, because this film pretty much predicted modern life as we know it. Because now, of course, social media kind of started coming out in the 2000s, but it really blew up in the 2010s. And like I said, this predicted modern life. There's one line in the film from Sean Parker, played by Justin Timberlake, where he basically says, "First we lived in farms, then we lived in cities, now we're going to live on the internet." And if that's not how modern society operates today, then I don't know what other better way that you can possibly sum up our world as we know it. So, when I think of the word masterpiece, when I think of contemporary masterpiece, this is the film that comes to mind. This is a film that is firing on all cylinders. It gets everything right. It is both timely and timeless. And then I think what's really interesting is that, of course, with all the recent scandals with Facebook, there's room for a sequel. There have been slight murmurs about possibly doing a sequel to The Social Network, and as long as they get the same people on board with the potential for the new directions they could take the story in, that is something I am totally on board for. I'd love to see exactly what they do with something like this. Again, I don't know if that'll actually happen, but I think if you made a sequel to The Social Network, there's a lot that you can do. There's a lot of potential for something like that.